on this episode of Clear the Air.
She goes, if you dive down to the bottom and grab me a handful of sand, you can dive free for the rest of the week. And so I dove down, grabbed a handful of sand, and came back up, and I dove for free for the rest of the week.
So was it 10 feet?
No, it was 70. I guess really what drove it is I knew that at some point, if I was a physician, I would more than likely have to tell someone that their loved one was dead. So we've got a country where we're spending nearly $4 trillion on healthcare and sick care mostly, and a couple of billion on public health. And I think that public health really needs to just refocus, and they should be blocked from ever talking about pharmaceuticals. Hello, my name is Nate Jones, and this is our very first session of the Clear the Air podcast. And here is Joel Melton, my co-host.
Hey, everybody.
And as we begin this podcast journey, hopefully what we will do is make it interesting. But I'm here to give you a little bit of background and perspective on things and the reasons for why I'm doing this podcast.
So I know a little bit of your background. We can jump in and talk about some of the things that are most interesting points in your life and kind of helped you form what you're at today. Maybe start with, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a lot of places. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, where my dad was going to medical school. And then I moved to Norman, Oklahoma, where he did a residency. And then he started working as a physician in a small town in Council, Idaho, which is up in the Panhandle, north of Boise, Idaho. And then we moved when I was 5 or 6 to St. Anthony, Idaho, which is where I spent my formative years. And I had a great childhood there. At the time, I thought it was just the armpit of the world that it sucked, it horrible. But as I look back on it, it was actually pretty amazing. I mean, when I was a kid, I was like, how come I can't live in L.A.? My cousins all lived in L.A., and I thought they were really cool for being from L.A., but they thought we were pretty cool because we were up in Idaho, and we lived on about 100 acres of land. We had canals and rivers. We would go swimming. We had horses. We had ponds that we would go swimming in. We would steal the neighbors' pig troughs and put them out on the ponds, and we would have battleship wars. And they could never prove that we stole their pig troughs because they were at the bottom of the pond.
You sunk them.
And but the water was only about 4 feet deep, and so we'd sink them, and then we'd pick them back up and have to get them out of the pond. And we would take horses, and I mean, we had a great time growing up. When I was, I want to say 14, we left there and moved to Texas, Arlington, Texas. And we lived there for a couple of months, and none of the kids really liked it. It was cold and humid, and there wasn't snow to play in, and so we didn't really like it. And then we moved to Michigan, which I really enjoyed Michigan. Kalamazoo, Portage actually, but it's a suburb of Kalamazoo. They don't like to be said that, but we lived there for a year and a half. And then my mom and my dad were like, well, we should give our kids some international experience. So they took us all down to Mexico City. And I lived in Mexico City my sophomore year in high school. I went to a school there where they taught in Spanish, except their physics class, which they taught in English for some reason. I almost failed English down there
Nice.
because the English teacher, for some reason, didn't like me. But when I went to complain to the principal, I out-argued the English teacher because she was arguing in her second language. And so the principal gave me a passing grade. Then we moved to Utah, where I live now. And I graduated from high school here. As soon as I graduated from high school, I started going to Brigham Young University. I got tired of that. I should have taken a break between high school and college. But I got tired of it and just quit one day and went and joined the Army and had a great time in the Army. I mean, how often is it that I get paid to jump out of airplanes and blow stuff up and shoot guns? I mean, what's not to like about that? And so I did that. I did all my training for that. And then I changed over and was in the National Guard for 8 years after. I think it was 8 years, 9 years after that. I re-upped once. But I ended up not fulfilling that second enlistment period because of other things we'll get into. I went on a mission, a 2-year mission, a voluntary mission for the church that I belong to. Went down to Argentina, lived there for a couple of years, working as a missionary. Came home, went back to school, couldn't really decide what I wanted to be. I kept thinking about being a doctor. My dad's a physician. I was taking all the pre-med classes, biology, chemistry, and all that. But I really couldn't get into the idea of taking care of sick people. I mean, I guess it wasn't interesting to me, and I didn't really know what I was going to do.
The hands-on portion of that, right? Taking care of sick people.
I actually don't mind. I want to mind the hands-on portion. It's. I guess really what drove it is I knew that at some point, if I was a physician, I would more than likely have to tell someone that their loved one was dead, had died. And I don't know that I could ever bring myself to do that because I think that would be a very hard thing. I've watched policemen do it, and I applaud them for their. But if I was a doctor, and I had to do that, you kind of have to go give someone a bill and say, hey, here's a bill for $10,000 for what I did trying to save your kid's life. And here's a bill for $50,000 for the mental anguish you put me through because I had to tell you that your kid was dead. I lost all interest when I started thinking of it that way. Then I went down to Mexico to Cozumel and I went scuba diving. And while I was scuba diving, this guy on the boat said, hey, if you like scuba diving, you should become a commercial diver. Hey, it's exciting. Live the life of excitement and danger. And I am a risk taker by nature. And so I quit school and went to school in Seattle for a year to learn how to do the whole underwater construction, diving, welding, bolting, everything.
Was this your first time diving when you went down to Cozumel?
No, I'd been scuba diving. I mean, I learned how to dive in Cozumel, but that was a previous trip to this one.
Yeah.
An interesting part of that is my dive master was from Holland, I believe. And we were out diving, and the water was like 70 feet deep where we were diving. I think it was, don't quote me, I mean, this is 20, 30 years ago, so I mean, but the dive master, I looked down the water, and she said, and I said, how deep is the water here? We're diving here? It's like 10 feet deep. And she goes, no, it's 70 feet deep. And I said, that's not 70 feet deep. And she said, yeah, it is. I said, no. She goes, if you dive down to the bottom and grab me a handful of sand, you can dive free for the rest of the week. And so I dove down, grabbed a handful of sand, and came back up, and I dove for free for the rest of the week.
So was it 10 feet?
No, it was 70. But a number of years later, like 10 years later, we went down there with my mom and my brother and my sister and my stepdad and some other people, and we were diving down there. And I think it was out on Tormentos. But I actually told my brother that, and he dove down, came back up, and passed out.
Oh.
And he sunk back down to the bottom, and we actually had to go down to the bottom and pull him out. And I mean, he was down on the bottom, pretty much been down there for 5 or 6 minutes before we realized he was gone. And we pulled him back up, and we had to give him mouth-to-mouth and CPR and everything. And we obviously brought him back. He's alive now. And
did you give him a free week of diving after that?
No. What I did think was part of the reason why we managed the same is I went and I worked as a commercial diver, and when I was working as a commercial diver, I was actually the medic. And you go through all this training where when someone drowns, you have to bring them back. That's part of what it is. And I think that knowing that and doing that probably played a part. I mean, because we drained his lungs before we gave him CPR. We drained his lungs. You hung him upside down and shook him to get all the water out of his lungs. Because a lot of people, even after they drown and you give them CPR, they'll come back. They'll get pneumonia because of all the water in their lungs.
Wow.
But he was in the hospital overnight. Maybe, I'm trying to remember, maybe 2 nights. But I think it was only 1 night. And 2 days later, he was back out snorkeling.
Wow.
We didn't let him go diving again, but he did go out and went snorkeling out on Islas Mujeres, which is a little island just off the coast of Cancun, like a 5-minute boat ride off of the coast of Cancun. But he was out there snorkeling a couple days later.
Wow. So I'd just like to point out and set the record straight. Your cousins were cool because they lived in L.A.
And we were cool because we lived on a farm.
I grew up in L.A. Do I automatically get the cool tag?
No, they've lost that a long time ago.
Well, I moved out before it turned bad too. Well, good. So a lot of experience. You were in Seattle, you said, to get the training for your deep sea diving.
I lived in Seattle from 90, I want to say 94 to 95, I guess, somewhere in there. Had a great time. I really enjoyed Seattle. I went down, airfare back then was just super cheap. I was flying Southwest down to Lake Tahoe every weekend for $50
Oh, wow.
to go skiing. I worked driving a shuttle bus at the airport, and I just had to be at the airport. And so I would go into the airport at 10 o'clock at night, and I'd drive people from the parking lot. And after midnight, it would always just die down, and I would just go to sleep on the bus. Every time someone buzzed it, you wake up, you go drive them to their car, you go over to the airport and pick them up, and then you go back to sleep. And I did that all through dive school.
Wow.
In fact, part of the time I'm like, why am I paying for an apartment?
Just sleep in the bus.
Yeah.
So bus to CEO. How did your upbringing, or is there certain points you can think back? I mean, you had a pretty good life, moving all over and living the dream. How did that prepare you, or what of those things that you've chose to do kind of develop your perspectives today?
I don't know that I would say that I thought that I was living the dream as a child. In retrospect, I thought I was repressed and held back and not able to go to L.A. And,
Yeah.
I come from a family of 14 kids, and so my parents didn't have money for us to do a lot of the things that a lot of people did. I mean, I never even went skiing until I was 22. They never had any motorized recreational vehicles until I was older. And I'm overcompensating for that now. I spend a lot of time skiing and doing stuff like that, trying to make up for my lost childhood.
You're finding your Peter Pan in reverse, right?
Yeah, but so the question of how I ended up starting this company is clear, and it's spelled Xlear. But I think that my upbringing really did allow for that, because I think my parents, they raised kids to try to at least think for themselves and be able to think for things out of the box. But anyways, how I came into this is because my dad, as a physician, again, thinking outside the box, he is the one that actually invented the main product that we sell. And he didn't really want to start a company. He enjoys being a doctor. He enjoys working with people and being a physician. And so I took the product and started a company. And the reason why I was set up for that was because even working as a diver, when I worked as a diver offshore in the oil patch off the coast of Louisiana and Texas, I was saving up money so that I could come back to Utah and start a diving business here in Utah. People don't really think of Utah as having a lot of diving business, but there's a fair amount of dive business. There's plenty of dive business here to support a small diving company, because you have to, all the dams and the bridges and everything like that, they're supposed to be inspected every couple of years, and you have to send
Makes
divers
sense.
down to do that. So how I ended up doing this is, of all of my siblings, none of my other siblings really wanted to quit their jobs in 1999, 2000, and take the risk of starting a company. And I had just had an experience diving where they dropped, it's called a submar mat, on top of me that, could have killed me if I'd been standing differently, but I was standing, I was on the bottom of the ocean down in Mexico. It was a job for Pemex, Petroleros Mexicanos, but I was sitting on the bottom, leaning at like a 45-degree angle, and the crane operator up on the surface a couple hundred feet up was just free spooling this big submar mat, which is, I can't remember how big they are. I think they're 10 feet by 20 feet of 1 foot cubes of concrete. And when you put two pipes running against each other under the water that are going to have oil or anything flowing through them, you have to separate them and I think it's 4 feet to get the current that's created so that the pipes don't rust. And we were sending these submar mats, and the guy was just free spooling it down. I don't know, he was tired. I always liked working in the night shift, so it was probably 3 or 4 in the morning. And anyways, I came out of that, and that was the last time I dove as a commercial diver. I came up and said, I'm out of here. I just had
saw the light.
I don't know how many tons. It's not a flat thing, but it still hurt. But that was the last time I dove. I left and started the company and ran with it.
Because you were going to try to do a dive business. You're already planning on doing a company. Now you just switched gears and started Clear.
Correct.
Yeah.
I've been saving up some money to start a dive business, and this one presented itself, and so we took this one. I had a friend of mine that ponied up $40,000 to start it, and that's how we got started.
That's the humble beginnings. Good. Well, tell me about so Clear is a hygiene company.
Yes, we are a hygiene products company. Yes.
Yeah. So tell me about the importance of hygiene briefly. We'll get into that in future podcasts, but why is that important?
I think hygiene is a very underappreciated aspect of healthcare. And I don't want to confuse healthcare and sick care, because once you're sick, it's sick care. Okay. And I think that our sick care industry, the hospitals, the physicians, and all of that, I think they've co-opted the name healthcare because it sounds better than sick care. But healthcare is maintaining your health, and sick care is getting you better from when you're sick.
Yeah.
And so hygiene, I mean, you can go back, and we'll get into this in future episodes, but during the course of human history, hygiene has done more to improve the standard of living and the standard of life and the longevity of life, the quality of life, any of those things, than any drug has ever done. Washing our hands, having clean water piped to our house, having the sewage and the trash taken away and disposed of properly and cleaned up and treated. And I think the public health has really just done an incredibly bad job in the last 30 years or 40 years of sticking to what works. And, you can go back and in the United States, you can go back and look at how from roughly 1880 to 1980, public health was really, they were focused on hygiene. They were focused on sanitation. They were focused on what worked to reduce people's exposure to bacteria and viruses. About the 80s, when they made, vaccine and they took away all of the liability for vaccines, now it's all just about vaccines. And that's all they think about. That's all they talk about. We don't see people going to the schools and educating the students about how to brush your teeth correctly, how to wash your hands, how to do any of these things. I mean, when I was a kid, they would come to the school, I want to say twice a year when we were little kids up in Idaho. They'd give you those little pink pills, and you'd chew them, and they'd show you a mirror, and you'd look at it and say, oh, my teeth are totally pink. And they'd say, well, that's because you're not brushing your teeth good enough. Brush your teeth better.
Right.
And they'd give you a little tube of toothpaste, and you'd go home and brush your teeth for a day or two.
Yeah.
I still have all my teeth. But they don't do that anymore. My kids have never had that at school. And I think that's a travesty because, we've looked at, and I've tried to pull data and get a good idea, and it's hard to find the data. But we know that in the United States, about 20%, it's 18%, so roughly 20% of our GDP, 18, I'm just going to use 20 as a rounded number, of our GDP is spent on sick care, on health-related stuff. And the best number that we can find for money being spent on public health is a couple of billion. So we've got a country where we're spending nearly $4 trillion on health care and sick care mostly, and a couple of billion on public health. And I think that public health really needs to just refocus, and they should be blocked from ever talking about pharmaceuticals. They should be talking about exercise, nutrition, hygiene, and sanitation. And that should be the extent of what they do.
Makes sense. I mean, I think it's a misnomer then to say public health and healthcare, like you said. It's sick care because most of the time they're going to get healthcare. They've got something wrong or there's something that they're trying to get solved. Public health is the misnomer because of what you just said. Those 4 blocks of good health should be what they're doing, but they're focusing on more commercial or pharmaceutical type things. And that's really where the tragedy is because of the transition, like you mentioned, where they start focusing on that and away from those hygiene and sanitation issues. Well, I think those are important, and we certainly will talk about that more in other episodes, especially relating to Clear and the flagship product, Clear nasal spray, as well as the Spry oral care. Well, think hard. What are some other hobbies or fun things you like to do?
I like to read. I like history. I like ancient history. I like unexplained history. Most of the unexplainable type things, the sites for those, Most of them I've been to. I mean, I've been to Machu Picchu isn't unexplainable. That's easy. But if you go down to Bolivia, you go to Tiwanaku, Pumapunka. I've been there a couple of times, and there's a lot of stuff there that you just can't explain. Egypt is one of my favorite places to go to. I've been there, I don't know, 15, 7, 20 times. I mean, I've been there so many times. My kids have been there 3 or 4 times. Wow. I enjoy Israel. There's a lot of stuff there, but most of the stuff in Israel is more of a religious nature. It's not the megalithic structures that you can't explain how they built them. I've been to India. There's some sites in India that are absolutely just amazing. I love Indian cuisine. I love food. I mean, look at me. I obviously love food.
Yeah.
I enjoy that. I still go recreational scuba diving. I spend a lot of time skiing. I read. I fly airplanes. I'm a pilot. You name it. I probably have enjoyed it at some point. I enjoy the adrenaline rush, and so a lot of my hobbies have to do with that. Nowadays, they're more tame, I guess, because I have 2 young children, and they're usually going on a lot of these things with me, and so I can't really get too crazy anymore. In fact, I have motorcycles, and I hardly ever ride them, and every time I look at them, I'm like, I should just sell those things. I don't ride them enough. But my youngest daughter, who's 11, she says, "No, I like them. No." She actually enjoys riding on the back.
Pulls you right back in.
And every time we pass them, she goes, because she thinks she's totally cool riding on the back of
Perfect
a
11-year-old.
motorcycle.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Clear Inc., the company, is about to celebrate 24 years in business, right?
Yep.
That's a long time. The products are out in the industry, retail, online, but you've kind of shifted some of your focus recently in terms of CEO, founder, president of the company, and stepped back from being president and still focused on CEO and obviously the founder. But what are you focusing on now? What's your time going to be used up with?
That's a big question. That'll be like many podcasts down the road where we talk about it in depth. But during the last 4 years during this COVID pandemic, I agree, and I think everybody agrees that there was a pandemic at some point, whether you want to believe it came from a lab or whether you want to believe it came from nature, from bats. We can all agree that something happened, that there was a virus that got out. But by May of 2020, we knew there were simple solutions. I mean, you had data, published data, where they just used salt water. And the FTC was censoring those companies. They censored us. They said, don't share the data from these studies. We had data showing that xylitol blocked the ability of the SARS-CoV-2 virus to adhere to tissue. Again, the FTC came out and came after us and said, don't share that data. And that really was disturbing. I really up until this point, I'd really thought that the government was mostly made up of people kind of like what you see in The Office, that TV show, where they're trying to do their job, but they're just out bumbling around and they do a mediocre job. It wasn't until the FTC sued us for sharing published data that I started thinking that there was other issues with the government where they were actually malevolent. There's malice in the government. And so I'm actually stepping back from spending all my time running the company because I think that people need to stand up to this overreach. I mean, I can sit there and show you data how censorship actions of the FTC contributed, if not caused, but easily contributed to the deaths of millions of people. And I'm going to spend more time fighting back against the lawsuit, which is actually, taking a lot of my time. It is aggravating because there's a lot of research that we could do instead of paying lawyers. There's a lot of other things that we could do that are better, but that's where I'm going to spend my time. And it's more, as much as I hate to say that healthcare is politicized in our country, it shouldn't be. Healthcare is healthcare. It shouldn't be, whether you're a right or a left or a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or anything. Healthcare should be healthcare, and the politics should be out of it. But in our country, healthcare is 100% politics. It shouldn't be. But we've seen in the last 4 years that it is 100% politics. And so I've got to find a way, and we're trying to get a coalition of people to start getting healthcare out of politics.
Yeah, I'm not as involved as you are, obviously, but I've certainly seen that there's some momentum in this. Others are joining on and seeing. And I think you're right. It's not a matter of right or left, political. It's agnostic, frankly, in politics. What it's out is absolutely about the individual and healthcare, and really, truly healthcare, as you termed it before, and going forward, and not just waiting for sick care, which is a misnomer in that case. But yeah, I think that's pretty exciting what you're able to do now because of your experience. So that's a great background. I think it will obviously put us in store for a lot of great experiences. Maybe your history sets you up in a perspective to be able to look at things, I won't say differently, but in depth, because of your desire for education and bringing out the truth and giving people that empowerment to know the truth and then make their own decisions. So I think we're in store for a lot of exciting future episodes of this podcast. Anything else you want to share with us?
Oh no, I've got a whole bunch of future podcasts to share all that with.
Well, let's keep it on the down low right now. Anyway, I think that's a great first episode of Clear the Air podcast. See ya.
This episode of Clear the Air was hosted by Nate Jones, co-hosted by Joel Melton, produced by David Monk, associate producer Matthew Davis. Video and audio were edited by Caleb Scoresby. Research by Sabre Bills. Music by Augusto Diniz. If you enjoyed this episode of Clear the Air, be sure to follow, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest episode. Have a favorite episode? Share it with a friend. New episodes of Clear the Air are published weekly on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.